Well, good afternoon to everyone, and welcome to the EdSite Post-Secondary Deep Dive, including college and career readiness data. Want to remind everyone that today's session will be recorded, and you are in listen-only mode, but you can direct some questions to the question box once we have the question and answer session. And lastly, we do have the PDF of these slides also available in your panel on the right-hand side. My name is Chris Soto, and again, thank you to everyone who's joining us today. I'm going to introduce two illustrious facilitators that we have at the department, Chuck Marty and Dave Alexandro, who both work in our performance office. I'm Director of Innovation and Partnerships and working on workforce development and college and career readiness. And so I'm going to, with that, again, thank you to everyone who's joined us. We really wanted to have this session because there's so much data on EdSite, and we do have a lot of great stuff that's specific to post-secondary, just like there's a lot of information that's specific to other areas. We do have some new clearinghouse data that's available, so we really wanted to take a moment to really dive deeper into just the post-secondary stuff that can help districts. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Chuck Marty.
Thanks, Chris. Well, I'll get us started going through the agenda by describing the contents and the differences between our two EdSite portals, public and secure. And then I'll discuss our college enrollment and persistence report on EdSite Public, along with other National Student Clearinghouse data, such as progress to a college degree. Then I'll turn it over to Dave, who will discuss the three indicators in our next-gen accountability system that attempt to measure college and career readiness, or CCR, in each high school and district, and where to find the numbers on EdSite. He'll also describe the CCR measures that we use in our early warning system, the Early Indication Tool, or EIT. Today, Dave will focus on high school students and the data used to predict the likelihood they will be college and career ready by the time they graduate. Then he'll discuss the new FAFSA completion report that offers schools and districts data on the status of their FAFSAs. And time permitting, we'll discuss some of the other reports linked to EdSite, including P20Win reports. P20Win is our multi-agency data sharing process to match our high school graduates' data with that of our public colleges and universities, and with the Department of Labor database on employment and earnings, in order to gauge their performance after high school, and our New England Secondary Schools Consortium annual report that results from our participation in a multi-state common data definition project. Several years ago, the SDE began its statewide longitudinal data system, or SLDS project, to build a data warehouse across data domains that describe students, instruction, performance, and educators in PK to 12. To report these data, we created a public portal, EdSite, with tables, charts, graphs, links to other reports, and suppression of small n sizes to protect confidentiality. Then we built a secure version that allows districts access to student-level data for those students in their districts and schools. When students move from one school or district to another, the next morning, that student's data are transferred to the new district and school for access by their administrators. We put together this next visual to give you a preview of the many places you'll find CCR and post-secondary data on EdSite Public. As you can see, it's woven into many reports here, including the Connecticut report cards, the profile and performance reports, our next generation accountability indicators, and our page that's dedicated to post-secondary performance. In addition to EdSite Public, EdSite Secure has post-secondary and CCR related data in several reports: the EIT for teachers, the FAFSA completion report, the student summary, and reports on SAT school day. We'll discuss some of this data, so if you're working with the LEAs, you'll know the types of data they have access to that may be of help. Most reports on EdSite Secure offer student-level data tables as well as aggregate charts and graphs. First, let's look at EdSite Public's College Entrance and Persistence Report. Once in EdSite, choose the Performance tab and then College Post-Secondary, and you'll find the College Entrance and Persistence Report. Each year, SDE provides the National Student Clearinghouse a file of its most recent graduates, which they add to a file of prior year graduates. Then they match these records to their database and return data to us on students' enrollment records by semester and degree completion for college graduates. The NSC receives these data directly from participating colleges across the country, comprising 97% of all non-proprietary public and private college enrollments. We compile the data into a usable format to show the percentage of students by graduating class who enroll in college within the first year after high school, and the percent of those students who then persist into their sophomore year. The data are available by school, district, and by sub-student groups. Here's one high school's report by high needs status. The data show that those students who are high needs, meaning they are English learners, have a disability, or are free and reduced lunch eligible, are much less likely to enroll in college and then to persist than their non-high needs peers. Another way to look at post-secondary data is to choose a high school graduating class and follow it through their enrollment and progress toward completion. Most of those statistics in the following slides are based on the NSC Student Tracker High School Feedback Reports that we provide for high schools and the state on EdSite. You can find the link to these reports on the left-hand sidebar in EdSite's College Post-Secondary tab. This table appears on page 33 of the State Basic Report. Now let's look at some highlights of the data. First, a caveat. College enrollment and persistence are primarily personal choices. They take into account alternative career paths and the cost of college, both out-of-pocket expenses such as tuition and books, as well as the wages foregone during college. Income, wealth, proximity to higher ed institutions, and family responsibilities, among other factors, shade these data in ways that can make comparisons on these statistics misleading. Connecticut is a high-income, high-wealth state, but state averages mask the skewed distribution of private resources and therefore post-secondary opportunities. That said, there's a lot to learn from the data. Generally, over the past several graduating classes from public high schools, for each 100 graduates, 73 enroll in the first year. 42 enroll in an in-state college. 47 of the 73 attend public colleges, 56 enroll in four-year colleges, and 63 of the 73 will persist into their sophomore year. Furthermore, most students don't get a degree in 4 years. Only 37 out of 100 do. 6-year graduation is the new norm. As you can see, the median high school grad will have a degree 6 years out. 22 will have enrolled and dropped out, and 19 will not have enrolled at all. The remaining 9 are still enrolled. When we look at trends, we find that the state level data haven't changed significantly in years. Here we're looking at the NSC Student Tracker report for the state of Connecticut and looking at the percentage of students enrolled in college at any time during the first year after high school. This is by in-state and by out-of-state. And what you can see is over the past several years, there's been little or no change. Enrollment, persistent completion rates are mostly stuck. If you dive down deeper into the data, it gives rise to concerns of equity. If you break down the data by student groups and by high schools and districts, you find that enrollment gaps are substantial, by race, gender, economic means, disability, and language proficiency. Generally, the college enrollment gap based on our indicators of income is 23%, disability 30%, language 26%, race between 13 and 20%, and gender 13%. And the completion gaps are worse. The result is that our college classes have proportionally fewer low-income students, students with disabilities, English learners, students of color, and males than the high school class did. Here's a graphic that shows the path, the post-secondary path for students who are economically disadvantaged, that is, were eligible in high school for free or reduced lunch price meals. The result of this is that, well, they comprise 36% of the high school graduating class of 2014, but only 28% of the freshman class in college. Of those from that high school class that graduated, only 18% were of low income. The data by race and ethnicity also reveals these same differences in post-secondary paths. The college freshman class and the college graduates class have a vastly different racial ethnic mix than the same high school class. This group that enrolled in college and those with a degree who graduated high school together is proportionally more white and Asian and less Black or Hispanic. The data by high school reveals these same differences in post-secondary paths. Let's follow the graduating classes of two high schools, East Lyme High School, the Vikings, New London High School, the Whalers, for the 6 years since graduation. The schools are 6 miles apart, exit 72 and 82 on I-95. But in terms of post-secondary experiences, well, they're worlds apart. In this chart, green is enrollment, orange is persistence, and burgundy is completion. Purple represents students who never enrolled college, and yellow represents students no longer enrolled and not graduated. Green, 86% of East Lyme Vikings enrolled in college, 61% of New London Whalers enrolled. Burgundy, 2/3 of Vikings had a college degree in 6 years, about a quarter of Whalers did. Yellow, 17% of Vikings dropped out without a degree, 38% of Whalers did. And these stories aren't unique to the shoreline. Now I'll turn it over to Dave Alexandro to discuss our CCR measures in the NextGen accountability system and the early indication tool, and to describe our FAFSA completion report.
Great, thank you, Chuck. So Chuck referenced EdSite Public and EdSite Secure, so I'm going to go through some of the information that can be found in both data portals. But before I get into the reports, I wanted to talk a little bit about Connecticut's Next Generation Accountability System, and it's often referred to as the NextGen Accountability System. So what Connecticut's done is we've created a system that incorporates a broad set of 12 indicators. So what we're trying to do is move beyond test scores and graduation rates, and as you've seen in the literature, hopefully, we're trying to provide a more holistic, multi-factor perspective. And we're doing that at both the district and the school level to measure performance and incorporate student growth over time. And I'm going to focus on the 3 next-gen indicators that deal specifically with CCR. So first is indicator 5. So indicator 5 and 6 both deal with preparation for post-secondary and career readiness. Indicator 5 deals with coursework specifically. So we're looking at students in junior and senior year of high school, so 11th and 12th graders, and we're looking at their course participation. Have they taken 2 courses in AP, IB, or dual enrollment? Or have they taken 2 courses in one of 17 career and technical categories or clusters? Or finally, have they taken 2 workplace experience courses in any area? So this is a coursework participation indicator. That would be indicator 5. And when we look at indicator 5, we see that 75% of 11th graders and 85% of 12th graders meet that indicator 5 benchmark. But just like Chuck pointed out disparities across districts in some of the post-secondary data, we also see those disparities in our next gen results. So for instance, I mentioned that 75% or 85% for 12th graders. When we look at districts specifically, in Bridgeport, the completion rate for indicator 5 or success rate is 55%, whereas in Weston, it's 99% of 12th graders meet the benchmark. And in Connecticut technical high schools, it's just about 100% of students meet indicator 5. Moving on to indicator 6, now we're still looking at CCR preparation, but now we're looking, rather than coursework, we're looking at exams. And again, we're looking at 11th and 12th graders and whether or not those students have achieved CCR, reached the CCR benchmark on at least one of the following exams. So it's the usual exams, the SAT, the ACT, whether the student has met the benchmark on an AP course or an IB exam. That would be an AP exam as well, not just an AP course. So with indicator 6, now we're seeing a much lower success rate because now we're dealing with meeting exam benchmarks. So statewide for 11th and 12th graders, we're seeing a state average of 43% meeting indicator 6, and an even larger district range than we saw for indicator 5. For example, New Britain has 11% of students who meet indicator 6, and Darien has 85% of students who meet indicator 6. So a very wide range across the state. Moving on to indicator 10, now we're looking more along the lines of what Chuck was discussing earlier. Now we're looking at college enrollment. So we're looking at the post-secondary entrance rate across all students in that district. And we're looking for students not only 4 years, we're also looking at two-year post-secondary institution if that student has enrolled at any time during the first year after high school graduation. So statewide, we see that the indicator 10 success rate is 71%. Again, as we take a deeper dive into district data, and this is all available on EdSite Public, in Windham, we see 39% of students meet indicator 10. In Weston, that number is 93%. So quite a wide range, even as we look at the individual indicators in the Next Gen Accountability System. The next slide just gives you a snapshot of what the report looks like in EdSite Public. So in one of the earlier slides, Chuck included a link that will take you directly to EdSite Public. And in the left navigation panel on EdSite Public, you'll see Next Gen Accountability will be one of the options you have. So when you click that Next Generation Accountability link in the left nav panel, you'll reach this report, which allows you to view year by year Next Gen results at the state level, the district level, and the school level. So I encourage you to take a deeper dive into the Next Gen results available in EdSite Public. Now, switching gears, I wanted to just cover a couple of the reports available in EdSite Secure. So the first, Chuck has mentioned the EIT, or the Early Indication Tool. And Chuck and I have been working on that for the last, Chuck has actually been at it a little bit longer than I have, but for the last 3 years, Chuck and I have been working on the EIT, which is a data analytics and visualization tool. And what we're doing is we're taking the longitudinal data available in our data warehouse, and we're trying to incorporate all of the different variables that are available to us. So rather than going along the lines of a typical early warning system in education that just focuses on attendance, behavior, and course performance, we're incorporating a lot of additional variables. And what we're trying to do is systematically predict and improve student outcomes. And in doing so, we're not only showing the support level, the designated support level to help these students, so all of this information is presented at the student level, we're also presenting all of the data so that administrators can, and even down to teachers, can see a longitudinal view for each student in their school and really get an idea for what this student's academic career has been like while they've been in Connecticut public schools. So I mentioned that this is a K through 12 system. So we're using what we're calling a mile marker approach. And you can see here that there are 4 academic milestones. So depending on the student's year in school, that will dictate where we are looking as far as their likelihood of reaching the next academic milestone in their school career. So for today's discussion, we're going to focus on mile marker 4, which is college and career readiness. And what we're doing in the early indication tool, when we're assigning a support level for each student, what we're doing is we're looking at the student's likelihood of reaching both indicator 5 and indicator 6. So the slide that you see right now, I've provided an overview of the report just so that you can read through that. But most important here is just to look at the snapshot on the bottom of the report. You can see that there are filters that allow the user, again, this is in the secure system, so this would be someone that's designated by the superintendent who has access to the student level secure data. And they can filter based on grade, they can filter based on a number of different criteria. They can also look for students that fall within a certain attendance band, so the people on the attendance team can use this report as well. And you can see that we've color-coded fields as well. And we've included our support level that came out of the statistical modeling that we've done that really allows administrators to get an early indication of which students would benefit from additional interventions. Another report that we have available in EdSite Secure is the FAFSA completion report. So this is different from the early indication tool because we're not looking at a longitudinal view of data. This is a report for 12th graders. Again, this is available in EdSite Secure. So this would be for authorized users and districts, and those districts would have had to execute a data sharing agreement. So this is a partnership with the Office of Higher Education, and we receive information from the federal government about which students have completed their FAFSA or the current state of their application. So it's not anything involving financial information. It's simply a status report. Has the student started their FAFSA? Have they completed it? And you can see here there are 2 filters at the top of the report. If you're in a district that has 12th graders across multiple schools or programs, you can filter based on school or program. And you could also filter based on the FAFSA completion status. So this is a very straightforward report, and we have been seeing increased use of this report over the last year or so. And going along those same lines, I've talked about increased use of the report. It really captures the increased buy-in from district schools and families. So when we look strictly at how many districts have opted in to receive this information, we can see that the vast majority of Connecticut students are covered in the FAFSA completion report. In fact, it's 96% of high school students in Connecticut public schools were included in the report. And when we looked just around May 1, we saw more than 60% of Connecticut high school seniors had completed the FAFSA before May 1st. And then as we moved along towards the end of the FAFSA calendar, we saw that by the end of June, Connecticut's FAFSA completion rate was up near 70%, which put us at 4th in the nation. So, I definitely encourage you to explore the EdSite Public and EdSite Secure reports that we're detailing here, and continue to engage with people in your district, in your schools, to really help our students on their post-secondary path. And I'm going to turn it back to Chuck, who will cover some additional reporting available in EdSite Public.
Thanks, Dave. As I mentioned before, SDE participates in P20Win, essentially a preschool through workforce, an information network whereby state agencies use a secure process to link our data to other agencies and higher ed institutions in order to provide researchers with de-identified data sets to study. On EdSite, on the post-secondary sidebar, you'll find links to our annual report on trends and remediation and credit attainment in Connecticut public colleges. This report is actually a part of our requirements under the SFSF grants during the recession several years ago. We are required to report this, but we've kind of expanded it into a larger report that looks at credit attainment and remediation by district, by student subgroup. And I encourage you to have a look at that. The one benefit of this report compared to the others is the National Student Clearinghouse doesn't provide any data on performance. We have no grades, we have no credit attainment. We don't know what courses they took, but under P20Win, we can send them a file of our graduates, and they will match it with currently all the public colleges, community colleges, and state universities, and UConn, and several participating private colleges in the state, and get back data on what courses they're taking and their credit attainment. So, for example, for this graduating class of 2014, we know that 41% of them enrolled in one of those schools within 16 months, and two-thirds of those students earned 24 credits by that time. So we get more data on the performance measures that will help us when we look at our college and career readiness indicators to determine if those students' performance in college mirrors their college and career readiness indicators in high school. I also would recommend looking at the 2017 study on earnings and employment outcomes with the high school class of 2010. In there, we take a look at students who, we also include NSE data in that, and we look at students who entered college and those that didn't enter college, and we look at their employment and earnings over the 6 years after graduation. And we compare that to a measure of the living wage, kind of a well-respected measure of the living wage out of MIT. And so what we find is that after 6 years, only about 30% of our students from this class were earning a living wage. It of course depended on a lot of factors, including what industries they were working in, gender, high needs, status, generally the same student subgroup gaps that we see in post-secondary performance. So please see the P20Win website as well for many other many more reports of interest. Also on the left sidebar, you'll find a multi-state report from the New England Secondary School Consortium. NESSC is a regional partnership that promotes innovations in the design and delivery of secondary education across New England. The NSC Common Data Project annual report provides transparent, comparable data about high school and college outcomes from across the New England states. I think you'll find that report illuminating, and what we've tried to do there is agree to a common set of indicators. We're still working on an acceptable college and career readiness indicator, but we look at high school graduation, high school dropout, college enrollment, persistence, and completion across the 6 states. And we do that by student subgroup as well. So I encourage you to have a look at that report. So this concludes our presentation. If you have any questions, please put them in the question box and we'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Dave and Chuck, for the great information. There were just 2 things that I wanted to start us off with. The first one is around indicator number 6 that you talked about, Dave. And just to clarify, there's essentially a few different tests that that we're monitoring for performance. And so, can you clarify if a student meets the benchmark on one test but maybe not the other? Does then that student essentially count as meeting the benchmark? Is it just one of the few tests?
Yes, yeah. So indicator 5 and indicator 6 both, when I had the multiple bullets, it is an or criteria. So if the student meets one of them, then they have met the criteria for that indicator.
Great. And then on indicator 5, I think the first couple of examples were pretty clear, but could you just further define a workplace experience course for those that may not be familiar with what that is?
Yeah, and I'll defer to Chuck on that one because he deals a lot more with the teacher course student information. So I want to make sure that we kind of provide the full description of that.
Right. This is a set of courses that are specifically delineated by the districts as providing workforce experience. And so we have a list of National Center of Education Statistics SCED codes that meet these criteria. It also includes the transitional special program enrollment for students with special education.
Great. And then just the last note before we go to some of the questions, we've got some great questions in the box. For indicator 10, there is, as it currently stands, it's looking at 2- and 4-year enrollment. And so there are ongoing conversations about what other things can be included in that, whether that's some type of post-secondary credential or an industry recognized credential. I know things like military service has been brought up in districts that have a large military presence. So just want to let you know that those things are ongoing for conversation, as because it's not a college. We don't want to create a college or bus mentality. We want to make sure that all students have all the post-secondary options on the table. So with that, I'm going to go to our first question, and also want to thank not only our participants in districts, but we do have a lot of community-based organizations, and that was also some of the impetus for today's conversation, because districts are kind of very much aware about EdSite, and a lot of administrators know how to use it, and so we wanted to make sure that we expanded that awareness to some of our school partners out in the field. So the first question is, can you let us know when and how many times clearinghouse data gets updated?
Yes. Oh, you want me to say more? Yeah. Yeah, we generally get 3 files per year on from the National Student Clearinghouse. In fact, right now I'm preparing the 2020 graduates file to send to them. And by November, we'll have a new file from them that includes this class and 7 prior classes and the PDF reports that you see now. Generally, we tend to use the August submission for Next Gen accountability and for presentation on EdSite. One for consistency and for timing. Next Gen numbers have to be out in January or February, and it takes us a while to get the data back, validate it, load it into the warehouse, and generate the indicator 10. So while we have intermittent files from NSC. The one we tend to use is their August file.
Great. Thank you, Chuck.
Mhm.
We have a question from Jesse. Is there a way to break down the indicators more specifically, referencing indicator 5, for instance? Is there a way to filter the data just for CTE course taking?
No, actually, just this year we created a data set at the student level to show by student which ones met each of the indicators. Because mostly districts were clamoring for this. We were arguing that no, this student, took these courses and therefore, should be counted. And so now we do have that internally. I don't think we've ever provided it, but I think with a data request, we could break that down by indicator, by student, and therefore by any aggregation of student groups.
Chris, one thing I'll add there is what we've tried to do with the early indication tool is go beyond kind of course enrollment, is to look at course passing. So the fact that a student took an AP course, or they took CTE course, or 2 courses within a cluster, when we're looking at the early indication tool, we're going one step further and trying to determine whether or not, or present the information back to districts and let the districts know that this student not only has taken 2 CTE courses, but they've also passed. So they've met that indicator, and also not from just an enrollment standpoint, but from a course passing standpoint.
Great, thanks, Dave. This question comes from Lauren, and it's about the EIT tool, asking if the report is available for all students starting in the 9th grade, based on middle school data, or only for which students?
Yeah, that's available for all students. So once we have a new view that we're calling, well, 2 new views. One is the EIT for teachers. So traditionally, when we presented the early indication tool, it was for school administrators, because since this is student level secure data, teachers do not have access to EdSite Secure, because the access is granted at the school level. So because of that, we created a sub-report called the EIT for Teachers that allows administrators to create a subgrouping of essentially class rosters, so they can share the EIT information with teachers. So that information goes all the way down to grade 1. We even, for students that were in pre-K in Connecticut schools, we would have attendance information for kindergarten students. But beyond that, we don't collect a lot of information on the early years of Connecticut public schools. So the early indication tool focuses starting in grade 1. So we have students from grade 1 through grade 12. So once a student is enrolled in PSIS, so they've been registered in a district, that student will show up the next morning in the early indication tool. So all of the information from that student's longitudinal record will move with them to the new district. So while you're waiting on files from the sending district, you would be able to access the early indication tool data the next morning.
Great, and I think you answered some of the next question, which is about who has access for the FAFSA completion reports. And Dave, you mentioned certain people in the district have access, not, for EdSite Secure, and then specifically as we talk about the FAFSA completion data. And so the question was who or what are the parameters or process for getting access to that? Is it just districts, or can community partners access this?
Yeah, so it is just districts, and so what I think a community-based organization would be able to do is work in conjunction, perhaps, with the high school guidance department, and so the guidance counselors, many of them, districts more and more are providing. The superintendent decides. So if the superintendent feels, and usually they do, that the guidance staff should have access to the EdSite Secure reports, then that guidance, whether it's the guidance director or the guidance counselor, can access the FAFSA completion report. from there, you can then aggregate the data. So it would be fine to share, at the aggregate, what percent of our students have completed the FAFSA, how many of them have submitted, not submitted, but they would not be able to share the student level data without secure access, which is granted by the superintendent.
And just to clarify, I think that last piece is important, that they wouldn't be able to share student level data. I mean, for privacy reasons, but also their part of their opt-in also kind of covers that. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and part of the data sharing agreement with OHE is that the federal government sends a lot more information to OHE than what we include in the FAFSA completion report. So part of that data sharing agreement just clearly states that no financial information is kind of changing hands. We don't receive, it's not that we're just reporting this piece, that's the only piece that we receive from OHE. So we're not seeing any of the financial information that the families are providing on their FAFSA.
You brought up one point that I also think speaks to Tammy's question, which is about OHE. They essentially get a bunch of information, and then this report kind of only reports certain information. And Tammy's question was about, how do we define FAFSA completion? Does it mean that it's just submitted, or it was submitted but needs verification? And so that makes me think about whether or not OHE is receiving the information that says, was submitted, but student requires verification.
Right. Yeah. So
I'll go for it.
No, that's a good question, and we have there is a little bit of a lag in between. So we have had cases where a counselor has sat with a student and they open up the FAFSA with the family member present, a parent present, and they can see one status in the federal reporting system, and they see a different status in our report. So what we're basically receiving is, it really is just a flag that once the student has been verified and has received the fact that their application is complete, that there's no missing information, usually it's within 2 weeks, the next OHE load from the feds that we then work into our report will incorporate that information. But there is a little bit of a lag that we're seeing in between when the student receives kind of the thumbs up from the feds and when we see it in our report.
And I think that answers Jesse's question about how often it's updated. But I think to go back to the last piece about using the word verification, it's also kind of, in FAFSA terms, around this idea that, a student has to maybe update their W-2, or they need some additional financial information that they have to submit. So I think it does raise a good question on, maybe circling back with OHE to see if that information is provided from the feds, and that could potentially be reflected in what the counselor sees in EdSite Secure. Because if they see that FAFSA is completed, but it was done incorrectly, then there might be this false idea that, oh, it was completed and everything's fine, or it's completed and the families don't have to do anything else. So I think that's something that we could look at.
I can clarify that. So once we see completed, that means that they're not waiting on any signature sign-offs, anything. So usually we see it in the other extreme where, they have received the final sign-off and the report is showing that the application is incomplete. And then what the counselor has kind of heard from the families is, oh no, yeah, we did have that status, but we provided that remaining, whether, like you said, the W-2 or whatever was pending, and then usually in the next run of the report, that status changes from incomplete to complete.
Great. Well, I think the last question was just about getting this recording, Maureen. So this will be posted on our website in a few days, and so we'll definitely get that out via email, or you could just check back on the portal website. So I don't see any other questions, and I'll just check the chat quickly just to make sure. I don't see anything in the chat. So again, any closing thoughts or anything that we've missed from Dave or Chuck?
I just encourage you to check out EdSite Public and to speak with LEAs about the data they have in their own systems, as well as what we provide on EdSite Secure. And we'd be more than happy to answer your questions as you continue to use it.
Yeah, and then the last thing I would mention is for those at the high school level, when you are, if you are in a district and specifically working, let's say with the guidance department, I would encourage you to also ask for access down to the middle school level, so you really can see these students as they progress from middle school through high school, and you can have a better idea of their school record as they progress through your district.
Great. And we did have 2 quick questions come in. So they just wanted to get a little bit more clarification on the workplace courses examples. And then the second question was, if someone is using EdSite Secure and they're having questions, who's the best person to reach out to? And I'll go to the next slide to at least have the contact information up.
Okay. Yeah, I wish I could give you some more detail on the workforce experience courses, but I don't have that at my fingertips. But I would recommend that you go to the next generation accountability portion of EdSite, and once you can get that from EdSite Home, you click on next generation accountability results, and then on the left-hand tab there are 2-page summaries all the way up to 56 or 65-page description of everything that's in there. And then if you like, I can follow up with you with a course list from our TCS system.
That's great. And so that was Chuck, Marty, Maureen, if you have any other questions, and his email's right here. So again, thank you to all of our participants. Hopefully that this was helpful, and this recording will be posted on our website. And again, the slides are here on the right-hand side, but they'll also be included with the recording. Thank you to Dave, thank you to Chuck, and everybody have a great afternoon. Thanks, Michelle, who's been behind the scenes helping get this together.
Yes,
Have a
thank
good
you,
afternoon.
Michelle.